for you.
Good morning, everybody. Grumbling while you work is one of the most common issues in today's world. I guarantee if I said, hey, let's all close our eyes and raise our hand if we ever complain or grumble at work, the majority of the hands would go up. Or we grumble or complain after work or about issues that we have in social circles, whatever it might be. Statistically, as Americans, we are becoming overworked yet underpaid. We, in almost every stream of life, roughly 16 million Americans work 2 jobs. If that's you, I'm with you. We work 2 jobs, we're bivocational. And a lot that aren't are starting to work more and more hours. The amount of hours that the average American works has gone up more and more and more. In fact, it is 3 times what it was in the 50s. That probably might include, half of the workforce coming into the workforce now. But along with that, 1 in 6 Americans are now on anti-depression or anti-anxiety medications. Grumbling, negative speak at work, at home, in social circles, that's always existed, right? Paul's talking about it. It existed in biblical times. We go back literally to the beginning, and Adam grumbles and says, it was this woman that you gave me that sinned first, not me. To me, that's a complaint, that's an argument, that's a dispute, that's a grumble. So that's not new, that grumbling takes place in our lives. But now, in a modern world, and I told a friend this week that I feel like every time I get up here, I bash social media, and I'm not anti-social media, I got them all. But we get to not only grumble to the person that's right in front of us. My wife is probably like my husband grumbles all the time. But not only is she the one that could hear it, I could broadcast it to all of my friends, broadcast it on Twitter to all of the world, or whatever social media of choice that I use to grumble. And all that grumbling that we do, whether it's on Facebook, whether we're the ones grumbling or we're the ones intaking by scrolling through and reading through, we are seeing more grumbling in our lifetime than they probably ever have before, just because it's more accessible to us, which feels like it's leading us on this downward spiral towards a dystopian wasteland of a future. Good morning. Welcome to church. I'm glad you guys are here today. I don't mean to just crash the plane right there, but roll with me. Paul says, do everything, or in all things, do so without grumbling, without disputing, without arguing, without complaining, depending on which version you read, so that you can be blameless. Now, I'm not a guy who likes to argue. Don't ask my wife that question, because she'll give a different answer. So let's go this route. I don't like to argue in social settings with people that aren't in my home life, or it doesn't have to affect my every minute of everyday situation. I don't like to argue. There have been times where I have to go into a very hard conversation. My heart is beating. So if you're one of those people who can walk in and be confrontational, there are moments I'm extremely jealous of you. And not confrontational in a bad way, but if you could walk in and just, give some sad news or some bad news, or be able to look at your boss and say, hey, no, this is what I was saying, and this is what I was doing. That's not me. I don't like to argue. I don't like to dispute any of that. I'll go the extra 20 miles around and do extra work so that we don't have to have an issue in this moment. Because I don't like to cause chaos or create disputes or disruption in a relationship. That's not me. But grumbling is a different thing than arguing to me. And we're going to get there. But how we speak to others, to ourselves, and to each other matters. It matters in our homes. It matters at our schools. It matters in our workplaces, our churches. Because all those places are built, the culture of them is built on tone and language used within their walls. And I'm extremely guilty of being in a lot of walls and grumbling and complaining and having issues with having to do all of this work while this person doesn't. I've worked in banking, I've worked in food service, I've worked in retail, I've worked as an educator, I've worked as a worship leader, I've worked all sorts of places. And no matter how much it starts off, it's like, yes, this is amazing. The grumbling is going to get there for me. And that's always been a pattern for me. And I've watched as the culture of some of the places I've worked at have been amazing, how they've gone to meh, to terrible. A couple of weeks ago, I'm out in the backyard, and I'm pushing my older daughter, her name's Harper, on our swing set in the backyard. And as I'm doing so, I get a text in my pocket from my team at work. And the conversation was one that had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with anything I had done. It had nothing to do with anything that would be perceived as me. It had nothing to do with how anybody else viewed me. It had nothing to do with anything that I could even imagine to be a part of. But it was a situation that happened between two other people in our workplace. And the texts went wild. Does anybody else have this at their work where you've got people that they'll text you and they'll complain all the time? No one's nodding their head, but I know you do. There's no way that I'm the only one here. And in this moment where I'm spending some time with my 6-year-old, I had to stop. She could 100% see the stress on my face. And I was to the point where I was ready to just walk away from that entire situation, meaning I was going to start looking for another position. Pulled up another county's, one that we live close to kind of, pulled up an application for them, saw how much of a price difference would be in the income, at least for me, and thought about it. I went from this moment of beauty with my daughter to a moment of stress, a moment of anxiety, a moment of just sheer being done like that, because it was just coming through in my pocket. And so how we talk, how we interact matters. When Paul says, work out our salvation, I read through a lot of things on that this week, the last actually 2 weeks. When he's talking about here, it's working the things out that hinder our relationship with Jesus, but also because God is working things into us. So in fear and trembling, work the things out of your life that are hindering you from him, but also allow Jesus to grow you because he's doing good works inside of you for work and for his will, for his good pleasure. He's mentioning negative speech by name. Don't grumble, don't dispute. He mentions it by name right afterwards. A couple of years ago, they did one study, 2 studies actually, on the same thing. Mythbusters was one of them, so if you've seen the episode, roll with me. IKEA was the company that did the other study. They took plants, 6 plants, and they put them into exact same conditions, isolated from each other. They watered them all the same. They gave them the same amount of light that they needed. They did everything exactly right by the book. For 2 of the plants, they would walk in, and as they're watering these plants, they would say nothing. That's typically how I water plants. I just, For 2 of these plants, they walked in, and as they were watering these plants, they spoke good things. You're so beautiful. You're going to grow so much. And then for the last 2 plants, they walked in, and they said negative, grumbling, complaining, you're so ugly, you're not going to grow. You're never going to reach your potential. At the end of these studies, the plants that were silently treated grew normally. The plants that were given negative speech were wilting in some places. They still grew a little bit, right? But not to the potential at all that the ones that were silent. But then the ones that were spoken to positively flourished beyond the potential they originally thought they could get to in the short amount of time that they had. So if plants that don't have ears can grow based on or shrink based on what's being said to them, how much more does it matter that we hear complaining or grumbling, or we say complaining or grumbling? Because the thing, just like in the story with Harper, it's not just me that was affected. It's not just me that wanted to go and quit my job and silence the group chat. My daughter in this moment went from being in a play moment with her dad to watching her dad clearly have a stressful face, stop playing altogether, and kind of just walk away. Because our groaning, our complaining, even if it's just to one person, the other ears hear too. And those ears that are hearing, even if it's just me to you, that's going to affect you too. And it's going to affect me, and it's going to affect everything. So what we say matters. How much more are we becoming a stumbling block to people when we complain or we grumble? It says in 1 Corinthians 8:9, what it says is, thanks, appreciate it. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. Don't be a stumbling block. The freedom that you have, the ability, you have every right to complain, to grumble, to argue, to dispute. You have all the rights of that, right? We've got free will. We have rights for that. But be careful that your freedom, your right that you have, does not become a stumbling block to those around you or to the weak. When we grumble, we are broadcasting our complaints, our anger, our bitterness, whether those be towards God, towards others, or towards ourselves. So how is your grumbling, how is your complaining or arguing affecting all those around you? I've made it a priority the past couple weeks to, when I walk into school, I get there really early because our whole household has to wake up early because my wife and daughter go to school at 7:40. My school starts at 9:40, but it's just easier if we all just roll out at the same time. So I get to school really, really early. And a lot of the other people that I get to school with that are also early, we like to talk a lot, right? And so, I'm going to say like semi-often, that leads to complaining about what's going on where we are. And so I made it a priority the last couple of weeks to not walk in and go seek out a coworker. In fact, I go to my classroom and I just shut the door. And on top of that, the last couple of weeks, it's become a priority of mine. Now that my school has moved back time, I joined Robert and a few of the other people that we work with on a prayer meeting that starts at 8:30 every morning. And the difference between walking in and meeting up with coworkers and just complaining about how little sleep we got, complaining about what we've got coming up that day, complaining about the situations that we have no control over. Instead of that, turning to a time of prayer and let's talk through things that we're thankful for. What are some things that we can encourage each other in? What's some things that we can pray about? It's only been 2 weeks, and my days have been immensely better on the days that I get to join in. Immensely better. So if nothing else, this 2 week, I don't like to say experiment, right? But the 2 week time that I've had to do that, I can tell you right now, thankfulness and prayer and encouragement have gone a longer way for me than complaining, arguing, and grumbling. Have you ever experienced that in your life? So how do we work towards this? What do we do? There's 3 signs that you're growing and becoming more like Christ, and they're going to be up on the screen. You're becoming more encouraging. You're more loving, and you are more understanding. And those seem like great things. When you look at the end of a journey, it often looks amazing, right? When you get to hear somebody's story about how they overcame these things, it's amazing. When you get to see Frodo get on the ship with Gandalf and Bilbo and the rest of the elves that are heading off to the west, it's beautiful. I just saw who my people are in this room, by the way. It's beautiful to see the ending. Who doesn't want to be more encouraging, more loving, and more understanding? Who doesn't want those things? And I always tell my students, if just a little bit more empathy and a little bit more understanding and love existed, this world would be 100% a different place. But while the outcomes of growth and evidence, or the outcomes of growth and the evidence of it are on the screen and being encouraging, loving, and understanding, the journey is a lot harder. Somebody had to overcome something when we hear those beautiful stories. Frodo had to walk into the fires of Mount Doom. I got you. But when we look through this passage that Paul gives us, we see 3 things that he calls us to in order to kind of work out the things for our salvation. And number 1 is obedience. And that's a hard word for us. I don't like that word. Obedience. I grew up in this rebel era, right? The mid-2000s punk rock era. I feel like I'm 32 and my anthem is still My Chemical Romance's Teenagers. Obedience is not a word that we like to hear. It's not a thing we like to do. It's hard for us. But obedience is the one essential to working out our salvation, because the rest of the things I'm going to say today start here. Not only should we listen to God's word, should we read it, should we understand it, but we have to work it out, do what he's calling us to do, whatever it is. Faith is enacted through trust and obedience. We can trust in what he's telling us and obey to do it. Working out the things we don't need includes us being unwilling to do what he's called. Because what he's doing is he's working in us to a great will and a work for his good pleasure. I want to make sure, because I know as I read that, my brain kind of was like, did I write that right? So let me make sure I get this clear. When we work out the things that are in us that hold us back from him, one of those things has to be the unwillingness that we might have to be obedient to him and what he's calling us to do. I just want to make sure that I know as I read that, I was like, wait a minute, that didn't sound as clear as I needed to be. The second thing is abandonment. Whoa, wait, we thought obedience was hard. Hang on a second. You just came up with another word that's even weirder and harder than obedience, and that's abandonment. Wait a minute, Evan. I don't mean abandonment in terms of abandon everything. Don't walk away from your life, walk away from your family. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about self-abandonment. And let me define that for us today. Obedience is great. God says, go and do this, and we do it. But at the end of the day, are we really doing and giving up everything of ourselves? Obedience costs us time and energy. 2 things that God does want from us. Abandonment costs us everything. It goes the next step further. But living a life that's abandoned to God is a life that we say your desires are our desires. What you're already doing, we just want to be a part of what you're already doing. I don't have to live my dream out if your dream is different. Living a life of self-abandonment is saying, God, whatever you're doing, I just want to be a part of that. Whether I don't want any of the credit, I don't want any of that. I just want to be where you are and doing what you're doing, whether they are my desires or not. Because now I want your desires to be my desires. Eugene Peterson, the guy who wrote the Message translation of the Bible, talks about when he reads Jesus pray in Scripture, he talks about how he uses what's called the middle voice. That we often see Jesus not being active and saying, I want this. We also don't see him being passive and say, God, you just take care of it. Now, he uses a lot of the time what's called the middle voice. He says, I want to be where you are doing what you're doing. Father, if it is your will, let this cup pass over me. But if not, let your will be done. Here's my petition, and here is my middle voice, abandonment. Whatever you want, I want. So abandonment is our second thing. And no, those aren't easy. The last one is rejoicing in all circumstances. And I love that we got there. I almost was like, I don't have to talk today. You guys hit every single point that I was going to hit today. Rejoicing in all circumstances. Paul is writing this letter to the church at Philippi, and Robert said this. He's in prison writing this, saying, I'm rejoicing in you because of your faith, because of your work, because of how great you're doing. That's amazing. And he is literally chained to a wall while writing this letter. I don't rejoice on the way to work when I'm listening to worship music and I spill coffee on my pants. This man is in prison, chained to a wall, and rejoicing that somebody else is having a good time and somebody else is living the way they're supposed to be. And he's encouraging them. He's giving them advice. Even when everything's going the opposite of what you would think most human desires would be. Because he's living an obedient, self-abandoned life where he can rejoice in all circumstances. So along with growth for our individual selves, right? Like that's a lot of that. We can't, as a church, as a people, be like, we're going to self-abandon together, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Those are all individual traits, right? Those are individual things you've got to work out your salvation in fear and trembling. So what does it look like for us as a whole group, though? Because this was a letter to a church, not to one person. It looks like unity. It looks like being the lights of the world. It looks like having unity with God, unity with each other. When we are at work and co-laboring for the kingdom together, it's easy to feel like someone's doing all the work. Last story, I promise. Years back, my wife and I and a few of our friends from college, and Caleb was there, we would serve Saturdays at the church we were at before. And what that would be was like we'd go out and just, do something to serve either somebody in our community or a business in our community or whatever it might be. The first time we went out, there were 6 of us. I was jazzed. I was like, dude, it's only going to grow from here. The second time we went out, there were 5 of us. And I was like, it's all good. So-and-so's got the flu, but we're all still trucking along. The next time there were 4 of us. Man, this stinks. I thought we'd have a few more people coming out with this by now. The next time I think it was just me and my wife and Caleb. And we're like, this is terrible. It's easy to feel like you're doing all the work. I could throw some statistics out. We could look them up together of how much percentage of a church does the actual percentage of the work. And it would probably surprise some of us, but not surprise others. But when we're moving in unity, instead of complaining, because I know that's where I've been a lot in a lot of modes of my life, we encourage each other to continue on working, and we let each other know how valuable they are to the kingdom and how valuable they are to you. There are a lot of people that work in churches that do not get a little bit of encouragement. There's a lot of people that do things at our works that don't get any encouragement. So moving in unity shows love towards each other and support. I may not be the best cook. I'm not even going to say I may not be. I'm not. But man, every single month we get to sit down and eat a really good meal. So showing love and support, even when it's not something that we can join in on. Trust me, you don't want me in that kitchen. You don't want me. We try to understand each other when we're upset or having issues rather than jumping to the defense or jumping on somebody else's back. Or, even worse, going to get our back up and find somebody else to join us in our grumbling and complaining. When we are alone, our lights don't shine so brightly. But when we're together and we encourage each other and we grow together and we shine together, the illumination is unparalleled. I've got a picture of, this was not this like cool moment necessarily of like worship, but it's a picture of a stadium with a bunch of phone lights, if we've got that up. This was actually at a wrestling event at SmackDown when they were last in town. And there was a tribute for a wrestler who had just died, and part of his shtick was that he, the people would turn on their phone lights, and they called them the Fireflies, all this stuff. They completely blacked out the arena. Everyone brought their phones out. They could have had the show. It was that lit up. But if I pulled out just my cell phone in that dark arena and lit it up, that would do nothing. I could see the back of the head of the person in front of me, and that would have been it. But with all these cell phone lights, I'm not kidding. The TV probably would have looked terrible, but we could have watched the whole show. When one of us is doing something and going for the kingdom, and then other people join in, other people encourage, other people love, other people understand, more and more lights start to turn on, and the illumination is unparalleled. So as the worship team comes back up to do one last song, I want you to get with somebody in this room. I want you to think, what does this look like for you? I love that Drew's walking up right now and he's like, is it cello solo time? I love that. You can see the look on his face. What does this look like for you? What do you need to work out of your life so that God can work his will and work in you? Where are you grumbling where you should be rejoicing? Where are you complaining where you should be encouraging? So as they're making their way back up, I want you to find one person. We always say don't go more than one because it really freaks the introverts out, right? So find one person near you, next to you. Give them your action step that has really stood out to you this week. Tell them what is something that you're going to work out of your life, or you're going to do your best to work out of your life. That starts today. That starts today. Be welcome. Let us